everyone, what's up? My name is Joss and welcome back to my channel, Squibbles Reads. Today I'm going to be reviewing 6 YA books that have gotten quite a bit of hype over the past little while. Of those 6 books, 4 of them have been published since the beginning of 2017 and 2 of them were published in the fall of last year. I will tell you right now that I am going to go into quite a bit of detail with all of these books, so this video is probably going to be like a million years long. Also, I do know that some of these books have been featured in other people's sponsored videos, but while I did receive a few of them for review from the publishers, this video is not being sponsored by anyone. So without any further ado, let us get into the books today. Okay, so we are going to start off with A List of Cages by Robin Rowe. Robin Rowe herself was actually a counselor for adolescents. This is her debut novel and it focuses on 2 boys. The first one is Adam. He is a high school senior, and for his option class or his elective class, he has to kind of help out the school psychologist. His task in particular is to go and find this one kid who hasn't been coming to his appointments. He eventually finds him and he discovers that this kid is his old foster brother Julian, who 5 years ago he was taken out of Adam's home and was moved into a different home. Julian is a freshman and he and Adam have not talked or interacted at all within those 5 years. Adam notices that something is a little bit off about Julian. There's something that he can't quite put his finger on about just his presence, the times that he's present, and the way that he describes his home life. Something is just a little bit not right. So the story goes on from there. One thing that I really loved about this story was just the friendship between Adam and Julian. It was more of like a big brother, little brother type of relationship. You could really tell how much Adam really cared about and worried about Julian. Something else that I really liked was that Adam had a diagnosis of ADHD, and you see him doing so many great things, forming relationships and forming friendships. And while his symptoms of the ADHD did play into those things and those relationships, he was successful and he was caring, and I think books just need so much more of this. So moving on to things that I thought could have been improved upon, I did not really get along with the writing style. It was very simple. There was a lot of like, he did this, she did that, the weather was like this. It was just very simple sentences, and it was all in first person. And also the structure of the book, there were a bunch of events, and then at the end of a passage or a chapter there was one very deep one-liner at the end of it that was supposed to have just like a huge impact, and some of them did, but I just thought that it was just too deliberate. It kind of cheapened the whole thing, like when soap opera stars like pause before something dramatic happens so the audience just knows that there's something dramatic. I don't think that it needed to be done that way, and I think it could have been more effective without it. Overall, I did think that there was just kind of like a lack of detail and very event-focused and outward-focused writing, but I did think that the second half of the book did focus more on inward stuff and included some more of those details that I wanted. But just in general, it was a lot of like, this thing happened, that thing happened, and the writing style did prevent me from connecting with this book more. One of my big pet peeves did show up in this book. I did not like that all the adult characters and all the characters that had like more power, so for example like teachers and the school psychologist in the book, were all either one-dimensional or they were villainous. I think especially with the school psychologist, with the author's knowledge, I think that she could have done a really good job portraying the scope of practice and all the different ways that the school psychologist could have helped or at least like held the space for Julian, but the author did not do that, and the school psychologist did end up being extremely one-dimensional, which I just think was a chance that she could have taken, which she didn't. There was also a line that showed up that compared kindergartners to what the author called manic depressives. I personally don't use that term, and the exact phrase that she used was vacillating between euphoria and despair with terrifying speed, and I do think that this borders a little bit on mental health appropriation, not to mention that some people who have bipolar disorder don't actually vacillate between mania and depression all that quickly. They can spend a little bit of time in either of those phases, so I just think that this line just wasn't delivered very well. Considering the author's background in mental health and that was the focus of the book, I was just surprised to see that there, and I think it could have done without it. I will also say that I do give a trigger warning for abuse for this book, so if you are sensitive to that, just know that going into it. Overall, I was waffling between like 3 or 3.5 stars, and because I'm a very indecisive person, I'm going to give it 3.25. Next up is Allegedly by Tiffany D. Jackson. This is actually one of the books that was on my most anticipated anticipated releases of 2017 video. So our narrator is Mary Addison. This is told in her first person point of view. She's an African American girl who was convicted of the homicide of a white baby girl, Alyssa, when Mary was 9 years old. This happened when the baby was under the care of Mary and her mother, so Mary goes to what she calls baby jail, and now in the present, where the book is set, she is in a group home. To make things a little bit more complicated, she also volunteers at a nursing home, and at this nursing home, she meets another boy whose name is Ted, and she falls pregnant with his baby. Mary's mom has a lot of say in what happens to this baby and what happens to Mary. So the book goes through Mary's current experience of that storyline, as well as kind of some unreliable narrator stuff. So because this is told in first person from Mary's point of view, the reader kind of has to figure out, did Mary actually do it? Did she not do it? And try and figure out what actually happened when Alyssa died. And every time that it is brought up that Mary was convicted of the crime, the word allegedly is used to kind of build that unreliability. So this is not just told in straight narration. There are also different things like transcripts from interviews with detectives, with doctors, with Mary herself. There are also some articles and some snippets of books that are inserted here and there. So let me just tell you how much I absolutely loved this book. It did make me very uncomfortable to read, but I think that that's a discomfort that I should sit with. Like, for example, there are some really awful things that happen, and while they may not happen to me, they do happen to other people. There's just this general tone of like mistrust and not feeling safe. So for example, Mary wants to take the SATs and she wants to go to college, but there are so many obstacles in her way. For example, she doesn't have the money to buy a graphing calculator or even a normal calculator, and she doesn't have the money to attend SAT prep classes, buy textbooks, attend school, anything like that. She also just has a whole bunch of people telling her that she shouldn't and can't go to college because of her background, and she's too dumb to make it. She also does not have an ID card, which kind of hinders things in the whole SAT taking process. Some things that some people don't necessarily even need to think about when they're taking the SATs. I thought that the dialogue was written very well. There was a lot of distinction between the characters and the way that they spoke. There was some discussion around nature versus nurture in young children that can commit crimes. There was like illustration of female friendships. There was also descriptions of faith and church because Mary's mom is a churchgoer. There was also a lot of talk about grief and loss. One of the things that I really liked was that there was discussion around institutional racism that's involved in criminal convictions and legal issues, which just made me feel really mad, and it illustrated that helplessness and feeling stuck just so well. One thing that I will say is that there were a couple of instances where Mary was derogatory or made derogatory remarks about this woman who was in the group home who ate a lot, and kind of what that effect has on that woman's figure. But I do think that the author did a good job about how Mary's mom and some of the other people in the story who were adults had those thoughts as well, and then Mary internalized those thoughts. There were also some homophobic beliefs in one of the other side characters, but I think that the book explained these beliefs by explaining how the institution and the system have these underlying beliefs to it, and thus it can develop in some people who are living under the system. So definitely just be warned about those things going into this book. Overall, I really loved it, and I gave it 4.5 stars. The next book that I'm going to review is History Is All You Left Me by Adam Silvera. This is Theo's story of how he works through his grief of his ex-boyfriend, Griffin, passing away in a drowning accident. And before Griffin died, he and Theo broke up, and Griffin started dating a new boy named Jackson, who is now the only person that can provide some sense of like comfort and companionship for Theo after Griffin's death. This causes a lot of internal conflict for Theo as he tries to like work through his grief. We switch back and forth between second person when Theo is talking about things that happen in the present, so he is talking to Griffin, and then we switch to first person when Theo is explaining things that happened in the past. I definitely think that writing in second person is a very strong and forward point of view to bring across to the reader. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but just switching from second person to first person, it was kind of jarring to switch at certain times in the book. Other than that, I really did enjoy this because it just showed boys in relationships going through that type of dating uncertainty that a lot of people go through in adolescence, but also just being intimate, having sex, and exploring different parts of their identity. Theo also had a diagnosis of OCD, which is mostly shown in his symptoms of counting things and feeling really, really uncomfortable when things are not in even numbers. I found that there were a few points and like feelings that the writing just spent a little bit too much time on, and also a couple passages that ended with those really dramatic one-liners that I think it would have been a lot more effective without, but those were few and far between, so I did end up giving this book 3.75 stars. The next book is Caraval by Stephanie Garber. This is about Scarlett Drogna, and she has a sister named Donatella, and every year they write to the head of Caraval, which is this mysterious show that happens once a year where the audience participates, and year after year they write and they don't get the opportunity, but the year that the book is set in, they receive a letter back from the head of Caraval, Legend, and he is inviting them to go, and of course they decide to go because they really want to get off their tiny island to escape their unfortunately abusive father. Donatella, or Tella as they call her, she is kidnapped by Legend, and Scarlett has to save her before the 5 nights of Caraval are over. So let me preface this review by saying that I was so excited for this book. People were comparing the premise of this to The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern, which is a book that I adored and I gave 5 stars. There was also a ton of hype for this at BEA, and a lot of people did get an arc of this, but unfortunately after reading it I was really disappointed. I thought that there was very little to ground the mystery and the intrigue of Caraval on, and the author defaulted to try to build that mystery around the sexiness and the mystery of a couple of boys that were there. So there were 2 of these boys, and they were the same type of like dark, mysterious, sexy, brooding boys in that stereotypical kind of way. Like with their crooked grins and raising their eyebrows and their little smirks, and how many girls they supposedly took home at the end of the night. Of course, the author did include the ever so popular line, "Something unreadable in his eyes flickered." So some other adjectives that she used here to try and build this intrigue were like scandalous, reckless, crooked, improper, just stuff like that, and I think that trying to use this trope to create mystery just never really works for me. It ended up feeling really empty and really did a disservice to what I think could have been really, really magical and really beautiful, but ended up falling so flat. It just didn't create any type of suspense for me, and I ended up feeling very annoyed along the way. Also with the character of Tella, she did kind of act as a placeholder for me. There wasn't very much character development. She had no drive and just kind of went along with everything, which is fine if that's how any certain person is, but there was really nothing to distinguish her or really develop her character. Finally, the author used a lot of descriptions of color, which were meant to make the world just lush and rich, and I think it could have been really well done. However, she really liked to use this phrase, "This thing was this color." The color of thing A and thing B, and that sounds really weird, but let me give you a few examples. A rich cerise, the color of seduction and secrets. Scarlett's cheeks blazed red, the color of hearts and blood and shame. Red, the color of love and heartache. This just got so repetitive that the more it happened, the more gimmicky it got, and the more frustrated that I got. Overall, I was just really disappointed in this book, and I did end up giving it 2 out of 5 stars. Okay, so the 5th book that I'm going to review is Heartless by Marissa Meyer. This is kind of an Alice in Wonderland retelling told from the point of view of the Queen of Hearts, or the villain. In this book, her name is Kath, and she is the heir to Turtle Rock Cove, and she is very passionate about baking and wants to open her own bakery, but her parents unfortunately have other plans for her. She is supposed to marry the king, and at this ball where she is supposed to accept the king's proposal, she becomes very intrigued by the court joker whose name is Jest. There is also this figure of the Jabberwock, which is the book's kind of overarching villain or like evildoer. So I will start off by saying that I don't have very much emotional attachment to the source material of Alice in Wonderland. I know that there are a ton of people who are really, really passionate about Alice in Wonderland. I am not one of those people. I did really enjoy the original story, but I am not coming from that point of view where I'm really attached to the source material. But the writing did try to emulate that kind of topsy-turvy whimsical nature of Alice in Wonderland, and I did think that it did well with that. However, the whole kind of stereotypical falling in love with, like it says on the Goodreads blurb, the handsome and mysterious Jest, instead of the also stereotypical unattractive and bumbling king, it was just something that's really overdone, and I didn't think that that part was done particularly well. It wasn't the villain retelling that I was looking for. Catherine, I just found, lacked some depth and some grit that I really wanted. I did enjoy the new storyline because there were a lot of additions that the the original Alice in Wonderland didn't have, so I did like following that story. Overall, just not what I wanted, not what I expected, and just kind of average for me, so I gave it an average rating of 2.5 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I'm going to review is The Sun is Also a Star by Nicola Yoon. This follows the story of a girl named Natasha. She and her family are Jamaican immigrants to New York City. The story starts on the day where she and her family are about to be deported. On that day, she meets Daniel, who is a Korean-American boy, and there is a spark that alights between them. My favorite part of this book was the whole discussion around immigration and how powerless people can feel when literally their fate and where they're going to live is totally and completely out of their hands. And also the impact that it can have on any particular person, like their family, their friends, their work, everything. I also enjoyed the portrayal of the adult figures. Like I was saying before, I really dislike it when the adult figures are just one-dimensional or they're just really not very nice people. So Natasha and Daniel's parents did have some obstacles that they had to work through in their own lives, and they did create some hardships for Natasha and Daniel. We also saw their reasoning about why they made those decisions regarding their own jobs, their migration, and other stuff in their lives. This made them really human and really complex characters. There were also little snippets that were written from the point of view of some side characters, for example, one of the lawyers that's involved. I thought that a couple of these points of view were trying just a little bit too hard to justify that character's actions, and I think that that stems from a place where the author is extremely attached to those characters and just wants so badly to make them human in the reader's eyes. That's not exactly a detriment, but I think that that really stood out here. Instead of just letting that character screw up and having the reader maybe dislike them or not agree with a decision that they made for a split second, because I know that as a human being, I can screw up sometimes just for no reason, just for human error. And I think that it's okay to just let characters do that. I mean, like 90% of the time, the side character's point of view really added depth to the story, but it was just that 10% that I was just like, just let them screw up, you know what I mean? Overall though, really great, and I did end up giving it 4 stars. Okay, so I made it to the end of that video. That was a lot of talking, a lot of detail, but there was a whole bunch of stuff that I did want to get out. If you've read any of these books, do let me know what you think of them. Thank you, as always, so much for watching. I will see you in my next video. Bye!